The air in the Mississippi Delta during the 1940s was thick with more than just humidity. It was heavy with the suffocating silence of a social order that demanded total submission. Imagine a 16-year-old boy sitting in the back of a rusted car, cradling his older brother, a decorated war hero, as his life's blood soaked into the upholstery. The crime? Having the audacity to stand straight in a world that insisted he bend. For John Perkins, that night in 1947 wasn't just the end of a life. It was the birth of a cold, searing hatred that should have consumed him. Instead, it became the fuel for one of the most radical transformations in American history. From a third-grade dropout fleeing for his life to a global architect of racial healing, Perkins's journey reveals how a man can walk through the fires of state-sanctioned torture and emerge not with a fist, but with a blueprint for a new kind of world. This is the story of how survival turned into spiritual revolution. The narrative of the American South is often etched in the soil of the Mississippi Delta, a landscape defined as much by its agricultural richness as by the systemic deprivation of the people who tilled it. Within this fraught geography, the life of John Perkins emerged not merely as a biography of survival, but as a profound theological and social transformation. Perkins' journey represents a rare trajectory from the visceral trauma of Jim Crow violence to the foundational leadership of the Christian Community Development (CCD) movement. His life serves as a living bridge between the localized struggles for civil rights and a global philosophy of holistic ministry, which posits that the spiritual health of a person is inextricably linked to the material justice of their community. To understand the architect of the 3 R's, relocation, redistribution, and reconciliation, one must first examine the architecture of the oppression he escaped. Perkins's evolution was not sparked by abstract academic inquiry, but by the harsh realities of sharecropping, the grief of early orphaning, and the searing injustice of state-sanctioned violence. His early years in Mississippi functioned as a crucible, refining a raw instinct for survival into a sophisticated, spiritually grounded activism that would eventually challenge the very structures of white domination he once fled in fear. Today we explore how a man who once swore never to forgive the South returned to it to become its most persistent advocate for healing. John Perkins was born in 1930 into the grueling world of New Hebron, Mississippi, a setting where the legacy of slavery had transitioned into the economic bondage of sharecropping. His entry into the world was marked by immediate instability. His mother succumbed to pellagra when he was only 7 months old. This detail is significant. Pellagra is a nutritional deficiency disease, a physical manifestation of the extreme poverty that defined his family's existence. With a father who was largely absent, visiting only once during his entire childhood, Perkins was essentially an orphan, raised by the collective efforts of his grandmother and extended kin. This early childhood orphaning created a profound sense of isolation that was only compounded by the educational limitations placed upon him. In the segregated South, the education of Black children was often secondary to the labor needs of the cotton industry. Perkins attended a local all-Black school only until the 3rd grade. The necessity of survival dictated that a young boy's hands were more valuable in the fields than turning pages in a classroom. By the age of 8, he was fully integrated into the labor cycle, waking before dawn to pick cotton alongside his female relatives. Perkins later reflected on the dehumanizing nature of this labor, noting how they were transported to the fields in open-bodied trucks, treated with no more dignity than hogs and cattle. This early immersion in systemic dehumanization planted the seeds of a later realization that poverty is not just a lack of funds, but a sustained assault on human worth. The defining trauma of Perkins' youth, however, was not the exhaustion of the fields, but the blood of his older brother, Clyde. Clyde was a figure of immense psychological importance to John, representing a model of Black dignity that refused to bend to the humiliating rituals of Southern racial etiquette. Having served in World War II and earned a Purple Heart, Clyde returned to Mississippi in 1946 as a decorated hero who expected the respect his service warranted. He comported himself with a self-assuredness that local white authorities viewed as a nuisance or a threat to the established social order. The tension reached a breaking point in 1947 when a local police officer began beating Clyde with a club. When Clyde attempted to defend himself, an act of autonomy forbidden to black men in that era, the officer shot him. The scene that followed was etched into 16-year-old John's memory with agonizing clarity, holding his dying brother's head in the back seat of a car during a desperate high-speed caravan toward Jackson, praying for a miracle that never came. Clyde's death was more than a personal loss. It was a revelation of the state's absolute power over black life. As the cars sped past sharecropper shacks and white-owned estates, the stark geography of inequality became a permanent map in John's mind. In the wake of this murder, Perkins felt his heart harden. He entered young adulthood with a vow of eternal resentment, viewing the white establishment not as a neighbor to be reached, but as an enemy that had stolen his family's most courageous member for the crime of being black. By the age of 17, the weight of Mississippi's oppression became an existential threat. Recognizing that John's anger and the volatile racial climate made his continued presence in the South dangerous, his family facilitated his departure to California. This move was part of the broader Great Migration, a massive demographic shift where millions of African Americans fled the mechanized agriculture and Jim Crow laws of the South for the perceived industrial opportunities of the North and West. California offered Perkins a radical departure from the cattle truck transport of his youth. In Los Angeles, he entered the industrial workforce, eventually finding his footing at the Union Pacific Foundry. For the first time, he experienced a measure of economic agency, serving as a shop steward and helping to organize a union to secure better wages for his fellow workers. This period was essential for his development. It proved that collective action could successfully challenge institutional power. Sociologically, this transition from agrarian serfdom to urban manufacturing functioned as a necessary laboratory for Perkins's future socioeconomic theories. Living outside the immediate shadow of state-sanctioned terror allowed his dormant leadership qualities to crystallize. By facilitating foundry labor negotiations, he shifted from an object of exploitation to an active participant in structural change. He discovered that when marginalized populations possess shared financial stakes, their inherent value becomes an undeniable political reality. Yet while he had escaped the geography of the South, the spiritual and psychological wounds of his upbringing remained unhealed, waiting for a catalyst that would eventually call him back to the very place he had fled. While the industrial landscape of California provided John Perkins with the economic stability he had been denied in Mississippi, it did not initially grant him internal tranquility. His psychological architecture remained dominated by the jagged scars of his youth, a deep-seated hostility toward the white establishment, and a purely secular drive for personal advancement. The radical transformation of this worldview originated not through a political rally or a scholarly lecture, but through the unassuming influence of his young son, Spencer. In the late 1950s, Spencer began attending a local child evangelism fellowship Bible class. The boy's infectious enthusiasm for the narratives of the gospel eventually drew both John and Vera Mae into the communal life of the church. In 1957, Perkins underwent a profound religious conversion. This was not merely a private emotional event, it was a comprehensive cognitive restructuring. He began to encounter a version of Christianity that transcended the white-dominated or otherworldly theology he had previously viewed with suspicion. He saw in the life of Jesus a revolutionary figure who stood in solidarity with the marginalized. He saw a mandate for reconciliation that Perkins found both terrifying and compelling. This spiritual awakening precipitated an existential crisis of conscience. Perkins realized that his newfound faith could not exist in a vacuum. The method of his transformation lay in the systematic dismantling of his psychological defense mechanisms. By 1960, despite having achieved the elusive American dream in California, Perkins felt an inexorable pull to return to the geographic site of his greatest trauma. The decision to return to Mississippi in 1960 was viewed by many of his peers as a form of madness. Mississippi remained the most volatile theater of the civil rights movement. Perkins settled in Mendenhall with a mission that was uniquely multidimensional. He did not simply arrive as a traditional preacher, he emerged as a community developer. He recognized that articulating spiritual salvation to a person with an empty stomach and no legal protections was an incomplete and hollow gospel. Consequently, his work in Mendenhall began with grassroots Bible studies but rapidly expanded into a systemic assault on the multifaceted roots of poverty and injustice. He established a daycare, a cooperative farm, and a clinic. These functioned as practical exercises in redistribution, one of his core 3 Rs. Perkins believed that for a community to achieve true flourishing, resources, including technical skills and local leadership, had to be reinvested internally. His relocation principle was lived out through his own physical presence. He maintained that authentic change only occurs when the reformer resides among the people, sharing their daily burdens. The most grueling test occurred in 1970 in Brandon, Mississippi. Perkins and associates were apprehended and transported to the Rankin County Jail. Perkins was brutally assaulted by white highway patrolmen. They utilized forks to lacerate his skin and struck him until he was semi-conscious. In the suffocating darkness of that jail cell, the reason for his mission was pushed to its absolute breaking point. He perceived a profound spiritual sickness, a manifestation of supremacy that had dehumanized the oppressor as much as the oppressed. Paradoxically, this encounter with pure malice became the definitive catalyst for his deepest commitment to reconciliation. As he lay on the cold floor, Perkins realized that if he allowed himself to hate these men, he would be no different from them. He concluded that the gospel must be powerful enough to heal even the most fractured of human relationships. The Brandon incident replaced lingering idealism with a sophisticated understanding of the cross, a rugged, bloody, and costly commitment. This harrowing experience solidified his resolve to spend the remainder of his life constructing the beloved community, a society where justice and mercy were mutually dependent. To analyze the sociological impact, one must examine how Perkins's relocation acted as a catalyst for local agency. He effectively dismantled the paternalistic structures that often paralyze community growth. This physical proximity allowed him to identify latent talent within Mendenhall, training residents to manage their own credit unions and educational centers. This shift from dependency to ownership represents the core blueprint of his strategy. This lived-out theology turned a site of historical trauma into a global blueprint for urban restoration. Following the trauma and subsequent spiritual clarity gained in the Brandon jail, Perkins did not retreat. Instead, he intensified his efforts by founding the Voice of Calvary (VOC) ministries. This move represented an architectural shift in his activism, moving from isolated community projects to a cohesive, replicable model of Christian social engagement. The reason behind VOC's structure was the recognition that systemic poverty is a multifaceted fortress that requires a multi-pronged assault. Under Perkins's leadership, VOC became a laboratory for what he termed holistic ministry. While traditional missions often prioritized either evangelism or social work, Perkins insisted they were two sides of the same coin. In Mendenhall and later Jackson, Mississippi, VOC established a health center that addressed the physical ailments of the poor. They founded a cooperative thrift store that provided affordable goods while circulating capital within the neighborhood, and housing renovation programs that restored physical dignity to the community. The fundamental catalyst of this success lay in the empowerment of local leadership. Perkins was meticulous about ensuring that these institutions were vehicles for local African Americans to exercise agency, effectively dismantling the psychological residue of the plantation mentality. By the early 1980s, Perkins's influence began to transcend the borders of Mississippi. In 1982, he relocated to Pasadena, California, to establish the John M. Perkins Foundation. This transition was not an exit from the struggle, but an expansion of the classroom. The foundation served as a strategic hub to synthesize decades of on-the-ground experience into a transferable curriculum for urban activists across the globe. The primary objective was the formalization of the Christian Community Development Association, CCDA, in 1989. This organization functioned as a nervous system for a burgeoning movement. Perkins's role shifted toward that of a global statesman of the streets. He leveraged his platform to challenge the predominantly white evangelical establishment. He argued that the church's credibility was inextricably tied to its willingness to relocate into the margins of society, transforming missions from a model of distant charity to one of shared life. As Perkins entered his later years, he authored numerous influential texts, most notably Let Justice Roll Down, which served as a foundational manifesto for a new generation. His analysis focused on the theology of the city, arguing that the urban center is not a place to be feared or fled, but the primary site where the gospel's power to reconcile is most visible. Concepts once considered radical, like living in the neighborhood one serves or economic cooperatives, have become standard practice for countless nonprofits and churches. Perkins successfully navigated the tension between the aggressive pursuit of justice and the tender necessity of forgiveness. He became a living testament to the idea that a person can be a fierce critic of systemic evil while remaining a tireless advocate for the humanity of the individual. His life's work serves as a definitive argument that true reconciliation is not a polite truce, but a radical, costly restructuring of society centered on the dignity of the marginalized. To explore the pedagogical weight of this era, one must evaluate how Perkins transitioned from a practitioner to a philosopher of the pavement. By codifying his experiences into the CCDA framework, he provided a navigational compass for future reformers facing complex municipal decay. He demonstrated that the most durable legacy is not built in brick, but in the minds of those trained to see every forgotten zip code as a garden of potential. Through this visionary transition, Perkins ensured that his voice would echo in every urban center where justice is sought. The trajectory of John Perkins' life, from the dust of New Hebron to the global stage of social reform, serves as a definitive case study in the power of redemptive suffering. His journey was not a linear path of progress, but a series of hard-won victories over systemic and personal brokenness. The reason for his enduring relevance lies in his refusal to accept a bifurcated reality. He rejected the notion that one must choose between spiritual fervor and social agitation. Instead, he forged a synthesis that recognized the image of God in the poor and the capacity for transformation in the oppressor. The manifestation of his legacy is visible today in the quiet, persistent work of thousands of community developers who have adopted his 3 Rs as their operational manual. By moving back into neglected neighborhoods, these modern practitioners are proving Perkins' hypothesis that the most effective way to heal a nation is to rebuild it from the bottom up, one block at a time. John Perkins did not merely survive the trauma of the Jim Crow South. He utilized that trauma to design a blueprint for a more just and reconciled world. His life stands as a challenge to any philosophy of change that ignores either the material needs of the body or the spiritual needs of the soul. In the end, the story of John Perkins is not just a biography of a man, but the biography of an idea that justice is the social expression of love, and that reconciliation is the only path to a sustainable peace. As he often reminded those who followed in his footsteps, the work is never truly finished. It is a long obedience in the same direction, fueled by the conviction that even the deepest wounds can be transformed into the most powerful sources of healing. The life of John Perkins challenges us to move beyond the safety of abstract ideals and into the rugged reality of our own communities. Take a moment to reflect on your own sphere of influence. Who is your neighbor? Perkins taught that we cannot truly love those we do not know. Are you positioned in a way that allows you to share the felt needs of those around you? What is your 3 R? We often seek justice or charity, but do we do the hard work of reconciliation? Reflect on whether your pursuit of justice includes the redemptive goal of restored relationships. Where is your Mendenhall? Every one of us has a place where loss or injustice has left a mark. Instead of fleeing, consider how those wounds might be the crucible needed to fuel your own commitment. John Perkins' story is a powerful reminder that theology isn't just studied in a classroom, it is lived in the streets. Subscribe to Theology today to bridge the gap between ancient truths and modern justice. Click the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let's move beyond survival and toward a spiritual activism that changes everything.